Why August is the most critical month for your roses somewhere in your garden right now. A decision is already being made. Not by you, by the rose. It is deciding, this month, whether the next 9 months go well or badly. And it is not going to ask your permission first. Most gardeners will tell you the critical months for roses are spring, when you prune, or maybe early summer, when the first flush comes on. They are wrong, and they are wrong in a way that costs them every single year without them ever knowing why. August is the month that actually decides the outcome. Not because anything dramatic happens in August. Because everything quiet that happens in August becomes irreversible by September. Here is what I mean by that, and why it matters more than almost anything else you will do to this plant all year. The plant doesn't care what you meant to do. A rose runs on a simple internal clock. Day length and night temperature tell it, with more accuracy than any calendar you own, roughly how much growing season is left. In spring and early summer, the plant reads plenty of time and puts everything into forward motion. New canes, new leaves, new blooms. Spend now, worry later. Sometime in August, that reading changes. The nights start cooling. The days start shortening, even if the afternoons still feel brutal. And the plant, using cues you cannot see and would not think to look for, quietly flips a switch from spend mode to store mode. This is not a metaphor. It is measurable. The plant begins redirecting sugars produced by its leaves away from new shoot growth and down into the roots and the base of the canes, building the reserve it will live off through winter and use to restart growth next spring. Whether that reserve is generous or thin is decided by what the plant experienced in the weeks around this switch. And once the switch flips, it does not flip back, because you asked nicely. You can baby a rose in September. You can feed it, water it, apologize to it. The plant has already made its call about how much reserve to build, and a few weeks of extra attention afterward cannot undo a summer of neglect beforehand. This is the part that catches people. They think of plant care as continuous, responsive, correctable at any point. Roses do not work that way in August. August is where the window closes. 3 outcomes. 1 month, everything you do or fail to do in these 31 days lands on 3 separate outcomes, and none of them show up immediately. The first is whether you get a real autumn bloom, the flush that, if you have never deliberately produced one, is quietly the best flowering roses do all year. Cooler nights let petals develop slowly and hold color instead of blowing open and fading in 48 hours, the way a July bloom does. The second is what kind of wood the plant carries into winter. Hard, woody canes survive cold. Soft, green, water-filled canes do not. Which one you get is set now, not in October when you notice the frost damage. The third is what kind of plant wakes up next April. A rose that entered winter with a full reserve tank comes out of dormancy fast and strong. A rose that entered winter running on empty spends its first 6 weeks of spring just trying to catch up. And you will spend that whole time wondering why it looks tired. None of these 3 things are visible in August. That is exactly why nobody treats August as urgent. The bill does not arrive until later, and by the time it does, it is too late to argue with it. So let's make sure none of the 3 outcomes gets decided against you by accident. Step 1. Find the number that runs the whole month before anything else. You need a single piece of information almost nobody bothers to look up. Your average first frost date. This is not a nice to know. It is the anchor that every other date in this video hangs off, not the calendar month. Not what your neighbor is doing 3 streets over in a slightly different microclimate. Frost. If you garden somewhere cold and your first frost typically lands in mid-September, your entire schedule this month compresses. You have less runway than you think, and every date below shifts earlier. If you garden somewhere mild, where frost does not show up until November, or does not show up at all, your window is wider than you assume, and some of your best blooming is still ahead of you rather than behind you. Two gardeners can follow the exact same advice on the exact same day and get completely different results, purely because one of them knew their frost date and the other one guessed. Go find yours now. Search your zip code or postcode with the words average first frost. Write it down. Every instruction from here forward counts backward from that one number. Window 1. Protect what's already growing. The first stretch of August has one job, and it is not growth. It is protecting the leaves you already have. Here is why that matters more than it sounds like it should. A rose survives winter and restarts in spring on stored carbohydrate, and it builds that reserve using its leaves, right now, in late summer. Leaves are the factory. A rose that loses its foliage in August has shut the factory down right before its busiest production run of the year, and it will not show you the bill until next spring. So go outside and actually inspect the plant. Not a glance from the path. Get down, turn leaves over, and look for two specific problems. The first is black spot, which tends to explode in August after a run of humid nights. You'll see dark blotches with feathery edges on the lower leaves first, then yellowing spreading around them, then leaf drop creeping upward through the plant. The single most useful thing you can do about it is not spraying. It's picking up. Every infected leaf that hits the soil becomes a launch pad, and the next splash of water throws spores straight back onto the plant. Clear the fallen leaves, strip the worst affected ones off the canes, and bin them rather than composting them. Then, change how you water. At the base. In the morning, never over the leaves at night. Wet foliage sitting for hours overnight is exactly what the fungus needs to get established, and removing that alone strips the disease of its biggest advantage without spending a cent. The second is spider mites, and this one gets misdiagnosed constantly. In hot, dry August weather, mites multiply fast, and the damage they cause looks almost identical to drought stress. Leaves go dull. Then take on a faint bronze or gray tint, then dry out from the edges inward. So people water more, and then more again, while the actual cause is a population of mites the size of dust specks living on the undersides of the leaves. Turn a leaf over and look for fine pale stippling as if someone tapped it with a pin 100 times, and check where the leaf meets the stem for very fine webbing. If that's what you find, the fix is still water, just delivered differently. A firm jet aimed upward at the undersides of the leaves, repeated 3 days running. Mites hate being knocked off, and hate humidity. Do not reach for a broad insecticide here. It kills the predatory mites, keeping the population in check, and you end up with a worse outbreak inside 2 weeks. While you're already down there, top up mulch to 2 or 3 inches deep, pulled back an inch from the base so the crown isn't smothered. In an August heat wave, that mulch is the difference between roots that keep working and roots that shut down from soil heat, which is often the real reason a well-watered rose still looks wilted at 4 in the afternoon. One more thing before you move on. If your blooms are smaller than they were in June, with thinner petals and washed out or oddly darkened color, that's heat, not hunger. It's a normal, temporary response. It is not a signal to feed. Hold on to that. It matters in the next window. Window 2. The cut nobody talks about. Count backward from your frost date now to a point roughly 8 weeks out. In most temperate gardens, that lands somewhere in the middle of August. and it is quietly the most valuable date in the entire rose year. This is when you do a light summer cutback. A repeat flowering rose takes roughly 6 to 8 weeks from a cut to a fully open bloom in late summer conditions, which means a shaping cut made now doesn't just tidy the plant, it schedules the autumn flush directly. This is not a hard prune. You are not doing what you do in spring. Take somewhere between a fifth and a third off the top, cutting each stem back to just above an outward-facing leaf with 5 leaflets rather than 3, since 5 leaflet leaves carry the stronger buds behind them. Cutting to an outward-facing one sends new growth away from the center of the bush instead of into it, which keeps air moving through the middle and makes disease less likely for the rest of the season. While you're in there, take out anything dead, anything crossing and rubbing, and any thin whippy growth that was never going to carry a flower anyway. In the same week, give the plant its last real feed of the year. That timing is not arbitrary. Nitrogen tells a rose to grow, and new growth is soft and defenseless against frost. Feed too late and you are personally instructing the plant to build tissue that will be killed within weeks, at the exact moment it should have been hardening off instead. Feed too early, or skip it, and there's nothing in the tank to power the flush you just scheduled. Somewhere around 6 to 8 weeks ahead of frost is the crossing point where you get the blooms and still leave enough time for the wood to firm up before cold arrives. 2 details decide whether this works, or does nothing at all. Water deeply the day before you feed, because fertilizer hitting dry soil concentrates around already stressed roots and can scorch them. And put the feed on the soil, not the leaves. Foliar feeding in high summer heat is a reliable way to burn the foliage you just spent the whole first window protecting. Window 3. Start taking things away. The last 10 days of August have one job, and it's the one that feels wrong while you're doing it. You start withdrawing. Stop feeding completely. No nitrogen, no balanced feed, no last little handful, because the plant looked hungry. That conversation is over. Then, around 3 to 4 weeks before frost, stop deadheading. This is the instruction that makes people uncomfortable, because deadheading has been drilled into everyone as the thing that keeps roses blooming. It does, all summer. But understand the mechanism. Removing a spent flower removes the plant's chance to set seed, so it tries again and pushes another bloom. Keep doing that into late season, and you keep the plant in growth mode at the exact point it needs to be shutting down. Instead, leave the last flowers on. Let them fade and swell into hips, those round orange-red fruits. Hip formation is the plant's own signal that the reproductive cycle is finished, and it's time to redirect resources into the roots and harden the canes. It is the closest thing a rose has to an off switch, and it costs you nothing to let it flip. You get a bonus too. The hips look genuinely beautiful heading into winter, and they feed birds when little else is around. Watering changes shape here as well. Fewer sessions, more water each time, a long slow soak that reaches deep rather than a daily sprinkle that keeps roots shallow and lazy right when you want them pushing down. If your roses are in pots, none of that applies. Keep checking daily. A container in August dries out faster than any general advice can account for. The 2 habits that undo everything above there are exactly 2 mistakes that quietly cancel out everything in this video, and both come from good intentions. The first is feeding a heat-stressed rose. Blooms shrink in August, and the instinct is to reach for fertilizer. Because small blooms feel like hunger. They are not. They are the plant conserving itself in high temperatures, and dumping nitrogen on it forces growth it doesn't have the water or root capacity to support. You end up with soft, floppy, pest-attracting stems, often with salt buildup in dry soil on top of it. If blooms look poor in a heat wave, the correct response is water and shade. Not food. The second is the September panic prune. Someone looks at their rose in early autumn, sees how big it's gotten, and cuts it back hard. That triggers a wave of tender new growth at exactly the point in the year the plant should be closing down, and that growth gets killed by the first frost, wasting energy the rose needed for winter. If it's outgrown its space, tie it in, stake it, or shorten just the longest whips to stop windrock. Save the real pruning for spring, when the plant is ready to spend energy again instead of save it. Put it on the calendar. Look up your first frost date. Count back 8 weeks and put the cutback and final feed on the calendar. Count back 3 to 4 weeks from frost and mark the day you stop deadheading. Then go outside and turn some leaves over. That's the entire program, and it adds up to about 20 minutes of actual work spread across a month. Nothing here is expensive, complicated, or time-consuming. It is entirely about doing the right thing in the right 10-day window instead of the right thing at the wrong time, which, with roses, is functionally the same as doing the wrong thing. If this changed how you're thinking about the next few weeks, subscribe, because the next video walks through exactly what to do with those canes as temperatures keep dropping, and the mistakes made in September are even more expensive than the ones made in August. Tell me in the comments what your first frost date is and what zone you're gardening in. I read them, and I'll tell you if your window is already closing. Protect it now and let it decide the rest.